I now wanted to invite Dr. Claudia Ordoñez to the stage. Dr. Ordonez has had a lot of experience. She comes from another rare disease community, cystic fibrosis, and has had a lot of experience working with patient groups and advocacy organizations to kind of facilitate a kind of mutual learning process.
I think the goal of this session really is to have a discussion with everyone that's here, and really an opportunity for the researchers in the room to ask questions of the patients and families, and vice versa. So that's really my role, and the goal is that I facilitate that discussion. So maybe I can start that by asking, some of the patients that are here, if you could tell us a little bit, if you were to develop a new therapy for FSHD, what of all the manifestations that Dr. Wagner just went through, what would be the most important for you to treat?
I'm told I have axial weakness, and I actually can't hold myself up straight anymore when I walk. That would be the thing I would like to know. What could I possibly do so I could walk erect again, because I just can't anymore. Mm-hmm. And I'm coming from a dancing gym background and blah, blah, blah. Can't do it anymore.
Mm-hmm. So some of the muscle weakness for you. How does that sound to others in the room? Would that be similar?
I would second that with Susan's. My main thing is just being so frustrated that I can't hold myself upright unless I'm hanging on to something. My whole trunk is very weak, and I just would love that to be stopped.
From my perspective, I've talked to a lot of patients. I'm a member of the board, and a lot of us would like to just have the progression of the disease stop, and go from there and figuring out how we can exercise or do physical therapy or whatever to try to regain some function.
Mm-hmm. So that's a very interesting comment that maybe we can talk a little bit about. So there are other diseases. So the one I'm most familiar with, cystic fibrosis, is one where there's also progression of a disease, and that's pulmonary disease. And initially, the therapies that were developed, aimed to slow down that progression, right, or just improve symptoms. By now, there's in the last 10 years, there's been a focus on therapies that actually target the underlying defect with the goal of actually restoring some function. And so when you say that, that's, the goal is to really slow down the progression of the disease, do you see that as, initially, because there really aren't therapies right now that are doing that, do you see that as the first step, in a therapy that would slow down progression, and then ultimately you would be looking for something that would restore function, or is simply stopping the progression, do you think, the goal that the research community should go for?
Claudia, Greg has, over here, Greg has an interesting story with his therapy. He told it to me yesterday, and I think it's really interesting to share with all the other patients here.
Hi. One of the important things we have to understand is that this disease affects us differently to everybody. And that's the most important thing, is the inconsistency of the disease for each individual. So basically, where a person lacks the most or the least functionality is what's priority for me. For me, it's just basically my right scapula. But I mean, in terms of therapy, I've worked with a personal trainer for probably, I'd say about 5 years. And they have a technique called muscle activation technique, which is MAT. It's not very popular in North America right now, and there's very limited amount of training available for that. But in the last 2 years, I've been able to gain probably close to 18 pounds, 20 pounds, and majority of that is muscle mass. And I've restored a lot of functionality in terms of my scapula movement and things like that. So I think it's key to get people in the industry who really understand this particular disease and work with different types of techniques and therapies and exercises that will actually help you and gain certain things. Now, I'm 51 years old. I've been officially diagnosed since I was probably about 19 or 20 years old by a neurologist. And I've been just recently in May genetically tested, and it's confirmed, right? And there's only probably, I've got a large extended family, and there's only probably 2 other cases that I know of in our family. But none of my siblings or any of my parents affected by this. It's probably coming from my mother's side. But what's important, I think, is that we have to be able to identify what you want as your priority to work better for you in terms of physical activity. And I've worked with a trainer who really understands this, and I've been happy, very happy on what's going on. So for me, that's a success story. Now, whether my disease progresses beyond my age currently, or whether it hits a point where it just goes down, I don't know. I've heard of cases where people are bodybuilders and they lose all their muscle, or atrophy through different types of atrophy. But the key for me is activity and keep going. And if you keep going and stay active, I mean, as we get older, your muscle, just normally, you atrophy a bit of your muscle as you get older. So it's important for me to stay active and get in touch with a lot of professionals out there that are pretty knowledgeable in the industry and how to work with this. So that's basically it.
Mm-hmm. So let me turn it over to the researchers in the room then and ask, is it feasible to develop therapies that can help, the different symptoms that, have been shared with us here? Is that feasible, or do we need to think about, a lot of different therapies to treat a lot of different manifestations?
Well, I think that in our scientific meeting, there's a lot of hope and a lot of progress that should translate into clinical trials and hopefully into novel therapeutics. We are operating under a hypothesis that DUX4 is the major culprit of this disease, and I believe that we're in agreement that that single abnormality is causing these host of issues that we've discussed. So yes, one therapy for all the symptoms.
Mm-hmm.
I do have a question that came from Facebook, actually, that I would love to ask Catherine Wagner, because you mentioned in your presentation about osteoporosis. I'm way in the back over here, sorry, I got my computer on. So the question came from a 60-year-old woman who's actually being treated for osteoporosis, but she also has FSHD. She said she was getting Prolia injections for her osteoporosis, and she thought during that time her symptoms got really severe for FSHD. And if you had any correlation between the drug injections for osteoporosis and the declination in her ability.
No, I don't. Actually, Prolia was considered by some from an anecdotal report and a publication to actually be helpful for FSHD. So many people actually started getting Prolia for not only improving their bone density, but with the hope that it would improve their muscle mass. So this is the first example that I've heard where somebody feels that they've gotten worse. In general, the drugs that are used to improve bone density fall under the class of bisphosphonates. Prolia is not one of those, but bisphosphonates are very safe drugs for bone and for muscle.
All right.
I wanted
Drew?
to just maybe quickly follow up on a point that Dr. Wagner previously was saying. A lot of the current therapies are trying to target DUX4, so it's trying to get to the root cause, the root genetic cause of FSHD, and just somehow stop the entire biological disease progression. But I think one of our online patients said, you know, there are many symptoms you live with that you're looking for relief from, and there doesn't seem to be a lot of research on those things specifically. So it might not be treated through targeting DUX4, but like many patients report pain of varying degrees of severity, and some have real issues trying to manage that pain, and there's, as far as I know, no research going on that, or there may be other types of symptoms like that. So I was curious to see, from that perspective, what you all feel would really make a difference in your lives. Is it targeting DUX4, or is it treating something maybe more at the symptomatic level that would, are there any? Can you raise your, there you go, Wendy.
Wendy Shack from Texas, and I do some of our Dallas patient meetings, and I think the pain management is huge for these people. They have not found the therapy. You know, they're still searching for in that huge area. You would think that there would be a lot, which we're working on right now, but pain management means a lot to every one of them, especially to the shoulder area and the neck area. They really have a lot of trouble with that. And on that note, I also would like to bring up, our researchers do all this hard work, and I believe in everything that they will find a cure. But it is the responsibility of testing also, of our children to make sure they're tested. That's what our family have done. We're going to let these researchers do their job, but we're also going to do our job as a family and be tested to not pass this on. And there's a lot of things that you can do. We have 2 healthy grandchildren and a son affected with fish, myself affected, and a daughter. But I have 2 healthy, beautiful grandbabies that do not have fish right now, or won't have it. And I feel like that's our responsibility as fish patients for our future of our families.
So that leads me into a question for the researchers in the room. What could the patients or their families do to help in the development of new therapies?
My name's Amanda Rickard. I work for a drug development company for FSHD, and I just wanted to mention, maybe this is obvious, but the company that I work with would not have gained an interest in working on FSHD at all if it hadn't been contacted by a patient advocacy organization who initially funded us to do our first studies on FSHD, which launched into a whole drug development program, which we're working on now. So attending meetings like this, donating to patient advocacy organizations and supporting them, I think is the best thing that you could do to continue to support our work.
I just want to echo that. I think that the patient community that we are seeing here, and also what I experience in the Netherlands, is a very active community, very much involved, and I think that's for us essential. And I'm just very proud to be part of this community.
June. So, Dan Perez. So, I think one thing that patients can do is understand the research process and organize, as we've done through the society, and actively support research efforts financially. It sounds like a plug, but it really takes a lot of resources to drive data to answer these questions. So I think I think educate yourselves, understand, I think as you understand the journey of the FSH Society and what we've done in terms of raising money and promoting research and finding out more about FSH and bringing together clinicians and industry. So I think it's really important that every patient feel the onus and the burden of supporting in whatever way they can, either by presence, attending, learning, but really actively supporting those that are leading the field and trying to answer those questions rather than infinitely expanding sideways. I think we really need to look to the leaders of the field and support it. So I think working to organizations like Society, like Friends of Northwest, AFN, MDA, that kind of thing, and then also getting actively involved with government funding agencies in whatever country you're in, and then really saying, we'd like to see more dollars, more research, and as that data becomes more evident, then I think we can expand into patient-powered research networks, registries, these kind of questions. But it's really, I think it's really my own personal perspective, really, really, really imperative to understand the problem that we're looking at, understand it well, and then I think the rest will come naturally. So that's just my 2 cents. So.
Hi, my name is Bruce Wentworth, and I spent a long time working at Genzyme Corporation, who's up there on the board, and I'm also the former head of research at Sarepta Therapeutics. And you really have, as patients, caregivers, and family members, you have the most important task. Some of you have already worked hard on FSHD, but you really have the most important task, and the task is really simple. Show up when called, right? That's hard. That's easier said than done, because they're not going to call me for a biopsy, but you're going to get called. And some of those biopsies will be needle biopsies. It's not the coolest thing. Some of those biopsies will be open biopsies. But you need to show up when called. We just had an advisory committee meeting for a drug which is ultimately approved for Duchenne muscular dystrophy, the first drug really approved for DMD. And it was because of the loud, clear, and strident voice of the patient community that that drug got approved. It was an undeniable force between the patients and the associated scientists, including folks like Catherine Wagner and others who supported that approval process. And so your voice counts, your body counts. You are a prime example of the disease. Like it or not, we need the guinea pigs. Nobody likes to use that phrase, but we need people to show up and be present.
Thanks, Bruce. My name is Carden Wyckoff, and I'm from Atlanta, Georgia. Kind of to piggyback off of what Bruce is saying, but I think the most important thing that you as family members and individuals or patients of FSH is to get tested. Get your siblings tested, get your parents tested, get your grandparents tested, get your children tested. I know I read a lot of Facebook posts saying like, should I get tested, should I get not? Yes, get tested, because we need those natural history studies. And sitting in on the research conference the last day, that was one of their main takeaway points, is we need to advance our natural history, and we need the data so that we can increase the registry and make sure those numbers are solidified.
You have 3?
Yeah.
1.
One? Oh.
You can ask.
All right. Hi, my name is James Rice. I'm from Los Angeles. My first question is, so I guess the goal of this of treatment is to reverse all symptoms or to treat all symptoms, but is another goal to help regrow the muscle a bit to reverse it in some way? And if not, would exercise help in any form?
I think it's very possible that novel therapies will lead to muscle regrowth. FSHD muscle has a lot of muscle progenitor cells in that. We know that when we take a biopsy, as Bruce was talking about, we can isolate lots of muscle progenitor cells, and those are cells that form new muscle. So I think that's a real possibility. Since we don't have that therapy in hand, this is all speculation, really. In terms of exercise, there have been some studies, such as John Vising in Denmark showed that exercise actually was helpful in individuals who had FSHD in terms of improving some function. So I'm definitely a proponent of physical therapy or a personal trainer. I think that can have a real value.
It was mentioned to get tested, everybody in the family. I am curious, when insurance doesn't cover it and out-of-pocket can be costly, is there any assistance out there to have, like myself, tested to see whether or not I'm a carrier? My son is the first in our family to be diagnosed, and I just want to know what to do.
Our Wellstone, which is centered at UMass, would be happy to test any asymptomatic family member for FSHD. We have a large program to do that, so you can contact me. We'll send you out a kit.
I have a comment along those lines on the testing. It was a huge frustration point with us. When he was clinically diagnosed, higher CK levels, the EMTG test, and the winging of the scapula, the doctor said, look, the insurance company is expensive, it's going to take some time, has to be pre-approved. Weeks went by, we pushed, and when I pushed the doctor's office, next thing I know, I got a call back, they referred us to another neurologist. I don't think they wanted to deal with insurance companies. We went to another neurologist in Grand Rapids, Michigan, 2 hours away from us that had specialists, and they said they're better equipped. We went there, same setup. They said, it's expensive test. And I asked, how expensive is this test? And what I found, there's two places. $2,100 is what they told us from Athena, $1,600 from University of Iowa. I said, run the damn test. You know, I'm not waiting weeks now. We're already going on a couple months from when we first noticed something. It was one of the most frustrating things. So I went directly to the insurance company, fought with them, and said, hey, you know, 2 neurologists clinically diagnosed him. What's going on? Oh, you know, it's gotta get. They came back and said, $400. We'll cover $400. This test should be $400 because the word you're getting done is out of network. I'm like, who's in network? They gave me a list of 9 different labs. None of them did the test. And it was one of the most frustrating experiences. So, all right, so we're still going to fight them. So we're out $1,700. Okay, small price to pay to know what we're dealing with. But if he comes back positive, then my wife and I are going to get tested. He's got a younger brother that's going to be tested. And I'm new to this community. This is all new to me. But my gut is this is probably an underdiagnosed disease. And I think a lot of it is because the damn insurance companies fight you every step of the way. At least that was my experience. So, you know, I've seen some anecdotal stuff on Facebook. Somebody said, oh, you don't need to get tested because you're past childbearing age. You know, what about clinical studies? What about relatives? So I think it's within the medical community that not everybody, you know, is maybe up to speed. It's a rare disease. And the insurance companies, just period, will only pay what they have to pay for, and they'll drag their feet. So, sorry, it's my little rant's frustration. I don't know if I'm the only one to experience this, but that was my experience.
You don't get it in the microphone anymore? No. Okay.
Hi, I'm Justin Collins. I had a question when you mentioned the studies showing that exercise might help regenerate some of the muscle. The patients that was tested on, do you know if it was all early onset diagnosed patients or ones that might not have been diagnosed until they were like in their 20s or 30s?
I do not believe they were early onset. I believe they were more classic.
I had a follow-on to the Duchenne's treatment. What is the transferability of a breakthrough and a cure, or similar to another muscular dystrophy or another variant to FSH in particular?
If I'm understanding your question correctly, it's what's the transfer of one therapy or novel therapy to another, right? Right. So that highly variable. So for instance, the drug that just got approved, Exondys 51, terrible name, has no transferability, doesn't even transfer within Duchenne. It's for one subset of Duchenne, 13% of Duchenne, and doesn't even work for other Duchenne, certainly wouldn't work for FSHD. On the other hand, Pfizer, Bristol Myers Squibb are both doing anti-myostatin trials in Duchenne. Anti-myostatin has as good a chance of working in FSHD as it does in Duchenne. So if one of those two drugs gets approved for Duchenne, then we'll either have a trial for it in FSHD, or we'll just use it off-label in FSHD.
So, I just wanted to share with you a little bit of the story with cystic fibrosis that I think has some relevance for FSHD, so around genotyping. So the CF gene was discovered in 1998. And for about 10 years, there was a lot of hope about in identifying gene therapy. And some efforts around genotyping patients, right, identifying what mutation they had in the gene. And they were largely homegrown efforts, across the different centers, but insurance companies were not paying for it. And then, sometime in the early 90s, there was a large effort around newborn screening that, again, started in a couple of states. And by now, across all 50 states in the US, and then also, in many countries in Europe where the disease is very prevalent, there's almost universal newborn screening. And so what has happened in CF is that, insurance companies started paying for newborn screening. And so that provided, sort of identification of the genes in the childhood population. But then the adults, still were not genotyped. And so when we started doing trials that required knowledge of what your specific CF mutation was, that was back in 2006, not all of the adult population was genotyped. And we were facing some similar challenges in that, not all the centers could, had been able to genotype their patients, and insurance companies weren't paying for it. So it was one of the big efforts of the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation to try to get patients genotyped. And by now, once therapies became available that were targeting specific mutations, then that has opened up really the ability to get most of the patients genotyped. So just something that may be relevant for FSHD as
This is Dan Perez. I just wanted to add to the genetic testing. Part of it's a very complicated problem in terms of diagnosis codes, ICD-9, ICD-10, just starting with your diagnostic code. Certain systems don't even break out the various types of muscular dystrophies. So in terms of coding and how you reimburse to those codes, so that's sort of one half of the battle. I think we've got to remember that the diagnostic testing is a rapidly evolving picture. So until 3 years ago, it's a very old style technique southern blot, western blot. But with the new discoveries, they can use faster and more sensitive and more likable technologies in terms of RNA-seq, PCR, and that kind of thing. So, but then there's also a layer of getting a diagnostic test approved, getting the money to pay for that, venture cap to, so you could have a $50, a split test for $50 that you could send anywhere in the world. But I think the battle for us is getting that test CLIA approved, FDA approved, and getting people to put the money into approving the test. The venture cap people are going to want to see a test. If the test is $2,000, they're going to want to see a test for $2,500. So the question is, where do you get the money to sort of put that company forward to do the testing? And then the second half of the battle is the diagnostic tests are actually peer-reviewed when you go to get a new test. The scientific peers are actually reviewing the work. And so somebody could actually stand in your way of getting an FDA-approved test, even though it's rapid, it's quick, and it's a good diagnostic. But I don't want to go on, but also in terms of the algorithm, we can now sort of select or make guesses. Do you have a polyadenylation signal? What is your level of methylation? So we can look at various components of the genetic picture and selectively approve how we might want to go at screening or testing or that kind of thing. So just, I think you should remember it's a very rich problem. It's rapidly evolving, and it's changing every 6 months, and it's getting better and better. That's what I wanted to add. Thanks. Sorry.
Great. There were some other hands here.
I have two questions. One, I have a son who has Down syndrome, trisomy 21, and FSHD, and I'd like to hear if there's somebody else that has that. And the second thing is, a shortness of breath got to be a very serious problem for me. I kept blaming it on just my muscles. And so then I had pulmonary testing done and found I had a paralyzed diaphragm, and went online and found a couple other people who had that. So I wanted to know the significance of those two things together.
Thanks. Anyone else have that experience, the paralyzed diaphragm, and actually the comorbidity with something like Down syndrome or other conditions? We were talking earlier today about a patient who has both FSHD and type 1 diabetes. I've met patients who have FSHD and muscular or multiple sclerosis. Just curious. Oh, did you want? Okay, go ahead.
Okay, just want to introduce myself. So Ken Addy, I work for Acceleron. So there's a question about what you folks can do to help companies that are developing drugs for FSHD. There's only a handful of us who are actually in clinical trials for FSHD. Our trial is expected to have the first patient enrolled in a few weeks, so you'll hopefully be able to hear about that when it happens. We're currently opening sites for the trial. So there are a few things that patients do to help us, aside from entering into our trials. One is that we've had some patient focus groups come in and talk to us, and it's something that companies don't always think of doing, but we're glad that we do it because we get groups of key opinion leaders and MDs that come in and give us advice in our advisory groups. And then we talk to a group of patients like yourselves, and we learn a lot of things that we don't quite hear from the MDs, and it's very useful for us. It's not that they don't tell us about this or that symptom, but they don't always tell us, how important it is to you and why it is that you fall or almost, or have certain disabilities. And you you put it into focus for us, and believe it or not, it helps us choose, even our outcome measures and endpoints in our studies. So that's one way. Catherine mentioned participating in trials. There are natural history trials that are just observational, so you don't have to take any treatment. And then there's trials like ours that are interventional. So you can find out about these on clinicaltrials.gov. You just go in there, put in FSHD or whatever, and you'll see the studies that are going on. It'll tell you what the inclusion criteria are to be eligible for the study, and you'll see how the study is designed. You might even see a list of sites, or you can talk to your neurologist or whoever and find out if there's a site near you. And we will add sites to our listings as we open them. And then the third thing is to have yourselves tested. That way you'll know if you're eligible for a study, and then you can find out about the drug treatment to decide if it's something you're interested in. So our drug is an anti-myostatin drug that acts locally, and we're treating 2 particular muscles. You can find out if that's relevant to you. And then finally, regarding this kind of treatment, it's a treatment that increases muscle mass, but it may not necessarily translate as much into force and strength. So we know that muscle mass is under hormonal control, so we can manipulate the hormones that affect muscle. But exercise is important for the strength of that muscle. So there is some combination of these factors that do need to be taken into account. I don't think there's enough data out there right now about what kind of exercise is good. Most researchers agree that exercise does not do harm, and that was the first question they wanted to answer. And now we have to find out how much good it does. But hopefully it'll be a combination of these interventions.
My name is Jeff Berger, and answered June's question about comorbidity that was asked. If a person has a tendency toward autoimmune diseases, FSH or FSHD is one thing that might occur, but other autoimmune diseases certainly can occur with that, like MS and multiple others within the same person. So we're talking about a problem that is complex here. We're not talking about a simple problem. I think that if you have symptoms of FSH, sometimes other symptoms can develop that are also representative of other diseases, and they really do need to be checked out sometimes independently.
Got someone there.
Hello, I'm Gennaro Durso from Genetic Networks. Going back to the original question of what patients might be able to do, it's sort of a voice for the future, but I think based also on hearing $1,700 for a test, think about exome sequencing yourself, getting your complete sequence done. At our company, we're really interested in trying to get that type of data and trying to match drugs to that data, and we need people to do that. We don't do it, but you can get it done. It's just about under $1,000 now to get a full sequence done. So it's really something to think about, because if that data exists, we can actually work with it. And it could be interesting, especially when you have cases of DUX4 mutations that are asymptomatic. I mean, that's extremely interesting. And to me, I would just love to see what else is in there. So just keep that in mind.
Manuel Gomez, just in regard to comorbidity, we've always wondered, we have FSHD in my family. I'm the carrier, and my 2 first cousins both have multiple sclerosis, and we've always wondered if there was any connection.
I just want to briefly comment on the exome sequencing. So that would be perfect for FSHD too, but exome sequencing is not going to capture the FSHD1 mutation, so it's not going to work.
Right.
I'm hearing a lot of push for testing for extended family and whatnot. Is there potentially an unintended consequence to that, as then once you have that identified, can you purchase long-term care insurance or things like that, and what is the impact of that? So that's something to consider as you consider having family members tested. I know that's a bummer because we do want the testing.
That's an important point. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Oh, there's another question, June. Oh.
Just a quick input on genetic testing. You know, my experience with that, just as a general internal medicine physician dealing with a lot of variety of genetic things occasionally, I almost feel it's somewhat futile to try to get your genetic testing through the insurance companies, but if you do try, what I've been told by our insurance commissioner and even a letter from the Attorney General is that a lot of times these things come down to a legal contract, and there's a lot of genetic testing that's just outright excluded in that contract, which may not have anything to do with your choice. It may have to do with your employer's choice. And so I think the first step is to look at your policy and see if genetic testing is excluded outright. And then if you have further questions beyond that, to contact the insurance commissioner or have your physician see if he's willing to write a letter to the insurance commissioner or talk to him and see what the response is. And then I just a quick comment about benefits. Somewhere along the line, I'm not an expert in it, but it would be nice to have an attorney, an estate attorney, or somebody mention something about special needs trusts as far as getting your optimal benefits in the future.
We got to remember also that if you have somebody already tested in your family, and if you have somebody that's already been diagnosed, there are research studies out there that are looking for family members to test. So, and the other thing, if Obamacare is repealed, if you have that genetic result, are you going to be excluded? You know, that's my fear right now.
Hi, we're from Canada and Alberta. There's no charge for testing. We're very blessed. You're welcome to come. On Tuesday, I was very grateful to be Canadian. I'm very sorry about all the stuff. Now, just another thing to think about with the testing, to carry forward what the lady I'm looking at said. They don't test children for adult onset FSHD. Our daughter was diagnosed around 15. I was diagnosed around 15. She has 2 children now. She tried to do it genetically and remove all the carrying embryos. They were the strong ones. The weak ones weren't viable. So they gave up on trying to do that. And she was told she wouldn't be able to have any children because she was producing, quote, quote, bad eggs. We have 2 beautiful grandchildren now that were both surprises and blessings. They will not be tested. They will be observed until their teenage years. If they start to show symptoms, then they'll get tested. The doctors don't believe that you should have a label when you're a little kid. You should be able to do everything you want to do and can do, just like I did and my daughter did. And if you know your child at age 3 is going to be showing symptoms at 15, would you treat them differently? Probably. Now, that's only in Alberta. I'm not speaking for the rest of Canada, but I like it. No one put boundaries around me growing up. We didn't put any around our daughters. One got it, one didn't. They did everything they wanted to do. So testing is a good thing, but personally, I'm glad that I don't know about my grandkids. We just want them to have a full life.
I agree. Thank you.
There's a question over there.
I just wanted to, there was a couple statements in reference to benefits, and I guess I'm going to move back to the USA with this question, or this statement. I am a benefits expert. Right now, I was a benefit consultant in the US for 16 years, and right now I work for the Employee Benefit Security Administration with the Department of Labor. So I handle ERISA law for both the Philadelphia area and the Silver Springs, Maryland area. And we were talking about contracts in reference to testing, genetic testing. So what you would want to do is look at your plan document, and if your plan document, and the plan document is between your employer and the insurance carrier, and if it says in exclusions, which is typically toward the back of the contract, that it says that genetic testing isn't covered, that's where you'd want to look. Typically now it is covered, but there was a statement someone else made, is that because there is no treatment right now for FSH, that could be why the insurance company wouldn't provide genetic testing, because if the testing is covered, there is no treatment, whereas other diseases like cystic fibrosis that was talked about earlier, if there is, if it is discovered that it is, that someone has it, there is a treatment. So that's how the insurance companies typically think about it, whether it's right or not. If anyone has questions about benefits, I'm happy to take them after, because my employee benefits specialists, we handle a lot of questions about ERISA law, and typically a lot of these questions come in during the year.
Mm-hmm. All right, we have time for one final question over here.
Okay. I'd like to hear more about methylation. I mentioned earlier I was just diagnosed with FSHD2, and I'm told I have 15% methylation. Is that something that goes up and down? Would I likely have had better methylation earlier in life? And what is the effect on other systems of the body? Would it impact the fact that I've got 24/7 year-round allergies and severe dry eyes and just about every...
So methylation is a chemical modification of DNA, and it is a relatively stable modification. So it is not everywhere on your DNA, it is on specific places, and it is relatively stable at those places. It can differ from cell to cell or from tissue to tissue, and that is how basically, at least in part, we regulate what we use of our DNA and what we don't use. So in terms of the methylation of the repeats to which you were referring to, that is the 15%, that is, so basically the cutoff level is 25%. So everything above 25% we see as what we see in control individuals, and if it's below, then it's suggestive for FSHD2. We don't have any evidence that that changes over time, or yeah.
All right. Well, thank you. I'll turn it over to June. I want to thank all of you for really participating. This was a really interactive session.
I wondered if you have any general overall observations, or...
Yes, I think, I think of, if you can think of cystic fibrosis as a model disease in which there was really, the success that has occurred in that disease area in identifying really, therapies that are targeting the underlying defect had a lot to do with, efforts that were generated by the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation with the support of patients, and also the recognition that there needed to be an interaction with pharmaceutical companies that were, that might have been interested, but then eventually were in developing new therapies, and the academic community. So it was really the interaction of those four different groups that has resulted in finding, revolutionary therapies. And now there is, it's a whole new different world 10 years later where you have a lot of companies that are interested in developing therapies. And that has been, to the benefit of patients. So, I think that you have a lot of those ingredients in FSHD here in the room and beyond, I suspect. So, I would encourage you to continue those efforts in that discussion.
Thank you very much.